Good afternoon. Today's talk is a follow up of my last talk, which introduced you to Gulliver's Travels. Today, in this talk, I will be giving you a very brief preview or a plot summary, as it were, of Book 1 of Gulliver's Travels, which is A Voyage to Lilliput. On this voyage, we find that Gulliver goes to the sea as a surgeon on the merchant ship Antelope. The ship is destroyed during a heavy storm, and Gulliver, the only survivor, swims to a nearby island, Lilliput. Being nearly exhausted from the ordeal, he falls asleep. Upon awakening, he finds that the island's inhabitants, who are no larger than 6 inches tall, have effectively captured him and constricted his movement. After the inhabitants examine Gulliver and provide him with food, the emperor of this country orders his subjects to move Gulliver to a little used temple, which was in fact the only place in the entire kingdom which was big enough to house him. In the second chapter of the book, we see that the imperial majesty, who is the emperor, and Gulliver carry on a conversation in different languages, obviously, as best as they can. It was essentially more of a nature of telling one another what one thought, rather than carrying out a full-fledged fluent conversation. After the emperor's visit, 6 Lilliputians shoot arrows at Gulliver. Gulliver retaliates by pretending to eat the little archers and then releases them. This clemency and Gulliver's cooperation, in fact, so impresses the imperial council that they debate whether or not Gulliver can be freed. An officer takes inventory of Gulliver's possessions, which will be held until Gulliver's fate is settled upon. This happens in chapter 2. In chapter 3, we find that the Lilliputian emperor is pleased that Gulliver is not the enemy that they once thought him to be, and the fact that he was very friendly and cooperative. So he rewards him with some form of a court diversion, as it were. But these diversions essentially proved to be quite different from what Gulliver might have expected in an otherwise normal country with normal sized people. It is the Lilliputian court custom that men seeking political office demonstrate their agility in rope dancing, among other things. Now, how skillfully and how long can a candidate dance upon a rope determines his tenure in office. So, this was the condition that went along with it. Of the candidates, we see that 2 are particularly adept. One is named Reldresol, Gulliver's friend, and the other is Flimnap, who is the treasurer. Other diversions include noblemen competing for official favor by crawling under or leaping over a stick, a feat for which they are then rewarded with various colored threads. Gulliver also reviews the emperor's troops. He stands, legs apart, while the tiny men march through. As a result of Gulliver's cooperation, a pact between Gulliver and the emperor is agreed on. Gulliver is granted limited freedom on certain conditions. In return for abiding by those conditions, he will be receiving food sufficient for 1,728 Lilliputians, as the number goes. Gulliver swears to the articles in proper form, and the emperor frees him. So essentially, this chapter of this book is a culmination of some form of a mutuality of an agreement between Gulliver and his host. In the 4th chapter, after Gulliver's visit to the emperor's palace at Mildendo, Reldresol, who was Lilliput's principal secretary of private affairs, pays a visit to Gulliver and explains the factional quarrel between the high-heeled party and the low-heeled party in the kingdom. The conflict, he says, started over a religious question, And the question is, at which end should the faithful break their eggs? At the bigger end or at the little end? So this was essentially the debate that went on. The Blefuscudians break their eggs in the original style at the big end, but by royal edict, the Lilliputians must break their eggs at the little end. Now there are obviously villain rebels in Lilliput. Elder Soul says, and already 11,000 of them, the big endians as it were, have been put to death for flouting the orders as to that particular end of an egg that should be broken. The others have fled to the court of Blefuscu. He explains further that the Lilliputians have lost 40 ships in the war. The dilemma seems hopeless, for Lustrog, the prophet of their religion, has said, and these are the words of the prophet as I quote, "All true believers shall break their eggs at the convenient end." Unquote. This is how chapter 4 ends. Chapter 5 describes how Gulliver saves Lilliput from a Blefuscudian invasion, as it were, military invasion, by dragging the Blefuscudian ships to Lilliput. In gratitude, the Lilliputian emperor rewards Gulliver with the title Nardak. Gulliver is pleased with the new title, but he is not the emperor's due. He rejects a plan to destroy Blefuscu completely and argues for a reasonable peace treaty instead of total destruction. Gulliver's moderation in dealing with Blefuscudians gives Flimnap and Skyresh Bolgolam a chance to slander him, put him in a bad light before the emperor. The emperor listens to the accusations and is cold to Gulliver when he grants him permission to visit Blefuscu in the future. Later, we encounter a fire that has taken place in the palace. A fire has broken out in the palace, and when people in the palace were helpless, Gulliver put out the fire by urinating on it. There is a law against anyone passing water in the royal palace, however, and the empress is so horrified by Gulliver's firefighting technique of urinating on a fire, raging fire, that she never forgives Gulliver. The emperor, however, softens, though, and promises Gulliver a pardon for his crime, because ultimately Gulliver's purpose was to save lives from the fire in the palace. In the next chapter, which is chapter 6 of the book, Gulliver provides readers with information regarding Lilliputian culture and the personal treatment he receives from the Lilliputians. This chapter is essentially some form of an information gap filler, as it were, because a lot of readers might have wanted to know by this time in the book as to the cultural traits or the social conditions in which the Lilliputians lived and conducted themselves. Regarding the Lilliputian system of laws, Gulliver says that treason is obviously severely punished, which is not particularly surprising, but there are other laws as well. These laws punish an unsuccessful accuser as severely as a traitor. Fraud of any nature is frequently punished with death, and any innocent man who is vindicated of a charge is rewarded. Interestingly, ingratitude is a capital offense. It's an offense that invites capital penalty. Moral rather than clever men are appointed to powerful positions, and atheists, people who do not believe in God, are barred from all government offices. Explaining the seeming contradiction between these good laws and the rope dancing corruption that we encountered in an earlier book, a chapter, Gulliver says that the latter were instituted by the present emperor's grandfather. The Lilliputians believe that parents marry out of sexual desire rather than love of children. Therefore, they deny any filial obligation and establish public schools for children. Parents with children in school pay for each child's maintenance and are forced to maintain those that they breed. The schools for young nobles are rare, but nevertheless they are very, very Spartan, and the students there are trained in the higher social or moral status, which implied training in honor, justice, courage, modesty, clemency, religion, and patriotism. The schools for tradesmen and ordinary gentlemen are almost like those of the nobles, but the duration of the schooling is shortened. The Lilliputians educate women to be reasonable, agreeable, and literate. Workers and farmers, um, have no schools. Their children are not allowed to go into any school. Now, resuming his tale, Gulliver then describes the visit of the emperor and his family. They come to dine with Gulliver and bring Flimnap with them. The dinner proves to be a disaster because Flimnap, the royal treasurer, is appalled when he reckons the cost of feeding and housing Gulliver. Remember, Gulliver had to be fed with the food of 1728 Lilliputians, so that's quite a considerable number from their perspective. What's more, Flimnap charges his wife is attracted to Gulliver and has visited him secretly. This is another intrigue in an otherwise prosaic plot. In the next chapter, which is chapter 7, Gulliver learns that Flimnap, Skyresh, Bolgolam, and others have approved articles of treason against him. His crimes include putting out the fire in the palace with his own urine, refusing to devastate Lefuscu as the empire desired, speaking to the peace embassy from Lefuscu, and preparing to take advantage of the emperor's permission to visit Lefuscu. The emperor accepts the charges, but he refuses to kill Gulliver. Instead, he mercifully decides to blind Gulliver and save money on his upkeep by starving him slowly. So this is quite a dangerous punishment at that, though it does not come suddenly. It will come in due course of time if Gulliver is in their hands. On learning this, Gulliver finds that he has no point in staying there and facing the punishment, as it were. He escapes to Blefuscu. In the next chapter, which is chapter 8, we learn that a few days after his arrival at Blefuscu, Gulliver sees a large overturned ship floating in the bay and hauls it to port. While he is restoring the ship for his return home, a Lilliputian envoy presents a note demanding that Gulliver be treated as a traitor, or Gulliver be returned as a traitor to the Lilliputians. The Blefuscudian emperor refuses to do so, hoping that Gulliver will stay as a war deterrent between the two countries. Gulliver refuses, obviously, and sets sail for home. Eventually, we find that a British merchant ship picks him up and returns him to England, where he is reunited with his wife and his family. So this roughly is the plot sketch, as it were, of book 1 of Gulliver's Travels, which is titled A Village to Lilliput. In my next class with you, I'll be analyzing critically the first book, that is A Voyage to Lilliput. Thank you.